The next time you squeeze honey onto your toast, stir it into your tea, or drizzle it over yogurt, take a second and look at it. That golden spoonful doesn't just taste sweet, it tells one of the oldest survival stories in human history. Today, honey sits quietly on supermarket shelves. It's cheap, easy to find, and most of us barely think about it. But for almost all of human history, honey wasn't a snack. It wasn't dessert. It wasn't something you bought in a jar. It was one of the most valuable foods on Earth, and getting it often meant risking your life. Imagine standing at the bottom of a 100-foot cliff with nothing but a bundle of vines tied around your waist. Above you hangs a massive wild beehive filled with thousands of angry bees. One wrong step and you fall. One mistake and you're covered in painful stings. Yet people climbed anyway. Why? What could possibly make ancient humans risk death for something as simple as honey? The answer isn't just that it tasted good. It begins millions of years before humans even existed and explains why your brain still lights up every time something sweet touches your tongue. Long before supermarkets, candy, or even farming, sweetness was one of the rarest things in nature. Fruits only ripened during certain seasons, and many contained far less sugar than the fruits we eat today. Early forests offered very few reliable sources of quick energy. Then there was honey. Unlike fruit, honey wasn't tied to a single season. A healthy beehive could store kilograms of concentrated energy in one place. For an ancient human living on meat, roots, and wild plants, finding honey was like discovering a hidden treasure chest filled with pure fuel. Scientists believe our love for sweet foods began long before our own species appeared. Millions of years ago, our primate ancestors evolved taste receptors that made sugar incredibly rewarding. Whenever they found ripe fruit or honey, their brains released dopamine, the chemical that makes something feel pleasurable. That reward system encouraged them to eat as much as possible, because in the wild, tomorrow's meal was never guaranteed. In other words, your sweet tooth isn't a modern weakness. It's ancient survival software still running inside your brain bud. Honey was very different from fruit. Fruit hangs in the open. Honey fights back. Wild bees don't simply hand over their food. They defend it with thousands of painful stings. Modern honeybees can attack in huge numbers when their hive is threatened, and although ancient bee species varied across regions, many were just as aggressive. So why didn't early humans simply leave honey alone? Because the reward was enormous. Honey is made mostly from simple natural sugars like glucose and fructose, which the body converts into energy almost immediately. Imagine spending an entire day tracking animals under the hot sun, or digging for roots with stone tools. Suddenly, eating honey would feel like plugging your body into a battery charger. It wasn't just delicious. It was one of the fastest sources of calories available anywhere in nature. Anthropologists studying modern hunter-gatherer groups have found that honey is often one of the most prized foods they collect. Among the Hadza people of Tanzania, honey can provide a surprisingly large portion of yearly calories, especially during certain seasons. In fact, researchers have observed Hadza hunters traveling long distances specifically to search for wild beehives. When honey is found, it's celebrated, shared, and eaten almost immediately. That's remarkable because the Hadza live in a world with many different food options, yet honey still ranks among their favorites. Imagine how valuable it must have seemed to humans living tens or even hundreds of thousands of years ago. But here's something fascinating. We don't actually know the exact moment humans first tasted honey. Unlike stone tools or bones, honey doesn't survive for thousands of years. It disappears. It leaves almost no direct evidence behind. So archaeologists have to solve the mystery using clues. They examine ancient cave paintings, microscopic traces on pottery, bee fossils, and even the behavior of people who still gather honey today. Piece by piece, they're rebuilding one of humanity's sweetest secrets. One of the strongest clues comes from Spain. In the Cuevas de la Araña, or spider caves, archaeologists discovered a remarkable rock painting dating back roughly 8,000 years. It shows a person climbing what appears to be a rope ladder toward a wild beehive while bees swarm all around them. In one hand, the climber carries a basket, almost certainly collecting honey. It's one of the oldest known images of honey hunting ever discovered. What's incredible isn't just the age of the artwork, it's what it tells us. Honey gathering was already so common that someone decided it was worth painting on a cave wall. But that raises another question. If people were confidently climbing cliffs for honey 8,000 years ago, how much older is the tradition itself? The answer may stretch back hundreds of thousands of years. Researchers studying chimpanzees, baboons, and other primates have observed them risk painful bee stings just to reach honey. Some even use simple tools to break open nests. If our closest living relatives willingly endure that danger, it's entirely possible that early human ancestors were doing something similar, long before recorded history. The difference is that humans became better at solving problems. Instead of simply grabbing honey and running, they learned to work together, watch bee behavior, and eventually develop smarter ways to reach the hive. And one discovery would completely transform honey hunting forever. Not stronger ropes, not sharper stone tools. Fire. Fire changed everything. Before humans learned to control it, stealing honey meant facing thousands of angry bees with almost no protection. But once our ancestors discovered that smoke could calm a hive, the impossible suddenly became possible. Even today, traditional honey hunters in Africa, Asia, and South America use smoking torches to reduce bee attacks before collecting honey. It's a technique so effective that scientists believe its origins may stretch back tens of thousands of years. Fire didn't just cook food, it unlocked one of nature's greatest energy sources. And once humans mastered honey gathering, they didn't simply collect it whenever they stumbled across a hive. They began looking for clues. Experienced hunters learned to follow the flight paths of bees returning to their nests. Some African honey hunters still work with an incredible bird called the Greater Honey Guide, which leads people to wild beehives in exchange for leftover wax and larvae after the hive is opened. It's one of the rarest examples of cooperation between wild animals and humans. Researchers believe this partnership has existed for thousands of years, making it one of humanity's oldest hunting alliances. But honey wasn't valuable only because it tasted sweet. It was packed with energy. A single beehive could contain several kilograms of honey, providing hundreds of thousands of calories. For families living in a world where food was never guaranteed, discovering a hive could mean the difference between hunger and survival. Children received quick energy, hunters recovered faster after exhausting days, and entire groups benefited from a food that required no farming, no cooking, and almost no preparation. Some anthropologists even suggest that high-energy foods like honey may have helped support the growing energy demands of the human brain. Although our brains make up only about 2% of our body weight, they consume roughly 20% of our daily energy. Every drop of honey offered fuel for the organ that made humans different from every other species. But there was another reason honey became so important. It could last. Unlike ripe fruit that spoiled within days, honey naturally resists bacteria because of its low water content. Sealed inside a hive, it could remain edible for incredibly long periods. Ancient people didn't understand the chemistry, but they quickly learned that honey stayed good long after other foods disappeared. It became one of nature's first long-lasting energy reserves. Then, around 10,000 years ago, everything began to change. Humans started farming. Instead of wandering forests in search of food, they planted crops and settled into villages. Eventually, people realized they didn't have to search for wild bees anymore. They could keep them close to home. Early beekeeping spread through civilizations like ancient Egypt, where honey became so valuable it was offered to gods, used in medicine, and even paid as taxes. What had once required dangerous cliff climbs and painful bee stings was now stored in clay jars. But despite all our technology, one thing never changed: our brains. Every time you enjoy something sweet, the same ancient reward system still switches on. It's the reason desserts are so tempting and why children naturally love sweet flavors without anyone teaching them. That preference isn't a modern invention. It's an evolutionary gift passed down from ancestors who survived because they recognized rare sources of energy when they found them. So when did ancient humans first start eating honey? We may never know the exact day or even the exact century. The evidence disappears too easily. But archaeologists, anthropologists, and evolutionary scientists all point to the same conclusion. Humans have been risking pain, danger, and even death for honey for hundreds of thousands of years. Long before cities, long before farming, and long before sugar ever existed, honey was nature's greatest prize. So the next time you open a jar and drizzle a spoonful onto your breakfast, remember this. What feels like an ordinary food today was once worth climbing cliffs, facing swarms of angry bees, and gambling your life for. And perhaps that's why, after all these thousands of years, your brain still smiles the moment it tastes something sweet.